always mount my Pan America by stepping onto the peg, up and swinging my leg over like so. This is a common technique for mounting and dismounting an adventure bike, which tends to sit up higher than other styles of motorcycles. And for someone like me that is inseam challenged, especially when I have luggage on the bike, it's kind of difficult to just swing my leg up and over, right? I'm not as flexible as I used to be. The other alternative is I can do the old, lift and scooch method to try and get on and off the bike. Not very graceful in any sense. But the internet's full of people that will tell you should not mount a Pan America like that, because by stepping up onto the peg, that weight is being transmitted to the kickstand, and that is mounted to the aluminum engine case, and by doing that, it's just a matter of time before all that stress causes the engine case to crack, and now your engine oil is spilling out all over the place. So I was genuinely curious, how much weight is transmitted onto the kickstand when I step up and over on the bike like this? To answer that question, I'm going to do some tests. For this test, I set up 3 digital shipping scales, one under each tire and then one for underneath the kickstand. On each scale is a piece of 3/4 inch plywood, about 8 by 10, to help distribute the weight evenly across the scale. And I got my GoPro camera here aimed at the readouts of the scales so that we can see the numbers in real time as I'm doing these tests. First, I wanted to get a baseline measurement of the weight of the bike. I held it upright and measured 310 pounds on the front wheel, 317 pounds on the rear wheel, for a total of about 627 pounds. Now that number may sound high for a Pan America, but keep in mind that includes my luggage racks for my Moscow bags, my top rack, and my top case, although the case is empty at the moment, plus a full tank of gas, which that alone is worth about 30 pounds. Leaning the bike over onto the kickstand and then cycling the ignition so that the ARH lowers into its resting position, I measured about 196 pounds on the front wheel, 236 pounds on the rear wheel, and 193 pounds being supported on the kickstand. Now when I step straight up onto the peg, this scale peaked briefly by about 370 pounds, but then settled at measuring 353 pounds, which is 160 pounds extra being supported on the kickstand. Now I do weigh a little bit more than 160 pounds. I'm about 180 and change. So a good bit of my weight, but not all of it, is being transferred onto the peg when I do mount like that. But that's not exactly how I mount the bike, right? I step up onto the peg and quickly get my body weight centered in line with the high side of the motorcycle. Okay? Now before testing that, just to make sure that I'm consistent with everything, I'll go ahead, reset how the bike is sitting on the scales, cycle the ignition so that the ARH can lower back down, and then step up and into the bike. And standing in this position here, I'm measuring about 295 pounds on the kickstand, so an extra 101, 102 pounds of weight being on the kickstand instead of 160. Now, if you watch the camera very closely as I do that, it does very briefly peak out at about 340 pounds as I have that initial downward push, but it's only for about half a second or so until my weight is shifted over. Now the one situation that I generally do not mount or dismount the bike that way is if I'm parked on any sort of downward slope going to the left, making the bike lean that way even more. In those cases, I generally opt to mount and dismount from the high side peg, right? Stepping up onto the peg, but again, making sure that I get my body weight shifted this time to the low side of the bike. I've heard folks say that they don't like mounting and dismounting off of the high side because they're afraid they're going to pull the bike completely over. But as you can see, even shifting my weight all the way to the outside, I pull it off the kickstand, Worst things that happens is I just go ahead, step down onto the ground, keep the bike from falling over. If you've been following my channel, you might be thinking, hey, you already did a video on this, and the numbers were very different. Yes, and they were, because in that video, the critical mistake that I had made was, in order to distribute the weight of the kickstand and have it spread across the entire surface of the scale, I only just used this piece of thin vinyl plank flooring, which was not good enough. And that's why in that video, I was measuring an extra 10 to 20 pounds tops of weight applied on the kickstand, which really didn't make sense. These numbers are much more plausible. Now, obviously, numbers and results are going to vary depending on your individual size and weight, what kind of luggage and other accessories that you have on the motorcycle that's adding weight to it. But in my opinion, this is still a safe and effective way to mount and dismount the motorcycle. Now, one caveat to this is, yes, that kickstand bracket is mounted to the aluminum engine case with just 3 bolts. And if any of those bolts were to start to loosen and back out at all, that's going to allow that bracket to start to move and apply extra stress to the remaining bolts. So I suggest checking those bolts as part of your regular maintenance routines, and then you should be good to go. As always, thanks for watching and ride safe.